Welcome to Wales Enterprise Day, which takes place today. Here at M-SParc anyway, and we're trying to build it up to develop this to something that's going to be across the whole of Wales and hopefully, across the world eventually, because we're showing how we can develop and grow in those ways. Pwrpas heddiw ydy I ni gael diwrnod yn siarad am Menter, siarad am eiddo deallusol, gwrando ar siaradwyr arbennig ysgynna ni yn ymuno hefo ni heddiw. Wedyn, mae yna lot fawr yn mynd i fod yn mynd ymlaen, digwyddiad anhygoel I ni heddiw yma, ydy cael gymaint o siaradwyr diddorol. It's great to be able to present the day to you today. We've got a great lineup of speakers, variety of backgrounds, but it's going to be everything around enterprise and intellectual property. Really important subjects for all of us, and especially here at M-SParc in North Wales. It's what we live and breathe every day of the week, and probably more than every day as well. It's 24/7. It's one of those areas, and it's such an exciting area to be involved in and to work in as well. We come across so many exciting innovations that we're working with here and across the whole of North Wales as well. I hope that this afternoon now, will be enjoyable to you. I know that we've got some fantastic speakers, so I'm really excited to listen to everybody. Now, I'm going to hand over to Jane Lambert, intellectual barrister, who's a great advocate of M-SParc and very supportive of the work that we're doing and to all of us as a team. And your work with us is very much appreciated, Jane. We really enjoy working with you. Diolch I chi. Mae Jane hefyd wedi dysgu Cymraeg. Mae'n mynd I ddeud rhywfaint o eiriau trwy gyfrwng I Gymraeg heddiw. So Jane has also learnt Welsh, and we'll start off in Welsh. This afternoon. Drosodd I Jane, over to Jane. Diolch yn fawr.
Iawn. Dwi'n mynd I siarad yn Saesnig sbecyn bach. I've just said that I'm going to, it takes a little while for my ear to get attuned when I come across, and I've driven over from Liverpool this morning, so it's not yet fully time. So I'm going to be speaking in English most of the time, but I might chip in Welsh. Now, one of my, I've been helping first Emily and more recently Gwenthian with Wales Enterprise Day since it started. It's always timed 6 months after World Intellectual Property Day, which is an international festival of innovation and technology, which we, I think, made the biggest contribution from this nation, from Wales. And we have done ever since Science Park opened. And Emily suggested that what we ought to do was to have a counterweight to this event in the autumn. Now, as a general rule, we focus on startups at the beginning of the year, and in Intellectual Property Day, and for the Wales Enterprise Day, we start thinking about scale-ups. So although we do talk also about scale-ups in World IP Day, and we talk about startups today, this is the weighting. We have had a lot of successes from this Science Park. A lot of companies which are not necessarily household names are certainly beginning to gain in reputation and popularity. And we'll be hearing from one of the founders of one of these enterprises in a few later on today. We are going to be focusing as much as possible on the way in which businesses, once they get started, can begin to fly, little feathers and fly. Now, that's what I do here, but I have another responsibility. I chair several other presentations, several of the days at the Cambridge Intellectual Property Law Seminar, Law Summer School, which takes place at Downing College in August. And we have some of the best speakers in this area of practice. And in my work, I do a lot of work for startups and small businesses. I've heard a lot of talks about IP strategy with startups, but the one talk which really stood out, and I've been doing this for the last 40 years or so, was a presentation almost on the last day of the conference. In fact, it was the last day of the conference, and it made everybody in the audience sit up, upright, bolt upright, and that was Anthony Craigs's presentation on, well, it was an introduction to strategy for startups, but I think today you've got something even more interesting for us. So I hope that I've given you a proper introduction. Anthony is a partner at Shoesmiths, one of the leading IP practicing firms in the United Kingdom, several offices, and I think you are a specialist both in non-contentious and in litigation and in enforcement. We'll be getting a real treat today, so I welcome Anthony.
That's very kind, Jane. Should we sort of move on to the presentation if you're happy?
I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. So as Jane said, I'm going to briefly talk to you about developing an intellectual property strategy. And when you talk about a strategy, it's quite a nebulous, quite an amorphous thing. And the reality is that there's no one strategy which is applicable to all businesses. But the idea here is to just kind of set out what you typically find in a strategy, and then identify the kind of things that you may want to develop in it for you. So with that in mind, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to join the Slido. So if you can scan the QR code or log into slido.com, put that number in, and what that will hopefully do is give you the opportunity to contribute during the course of the presentation, answering some of the questions that will come up. But if you just prefer to sort of pose questions as and when they come up, sort of live, then very happy to do that as well. So to bring things sort of trying to make things as relevant as possible, I thought what we could do is approach this exercise through the prism of a startup or a scale up. And I thought what we do is we would take a clean tech startup. So this is a company, an imaginary company that's developing a new system which manages energy from home solar panels. And effectively what this does is means that the owner of the home can choose to use the electricity, or store the electricity, or charge a car, or sell it to the grid. And in order to implement this, the startup has developed some new technology, home hub, and this home hub is sort of beautifully designed. It's on the wall, and then it's also written some software that's for the app, but also the software that governs the system. And with that in mind, what I suggest we do is go through and try and develop an intellectual property strategy for this startup or scale up. So everybody happy with that approach? Yeah. Well, in which case I thought we'd start with an easy question, if that's okay. And every company needs a name. And so I thought using Slido or just out loud, I could ask for some volunteers for a name for the company. Does anybody have any suggestions? Clean tech startup, battery, solar panel focused. Any thoughts?
Bolt.
Volt, yeah, that's a good one.
We've got Bolt in the car hire company from Estonia. We can have Bolt from Cymru.
Yeah. Any other suggestions?
And it's actually spelled with an F.
Yes.
Charge 'em up is a good one. The lunar cell. Yes, I like that. So should we go? Should we go with your suggestion, Jane? Which I think was that fault. Fault.
Both. The F in Welsh is speak.
Okay.
So the FOLT.
Okay, great. So with that in mind, we just need to then think about what the aim is of us generating this intellectual property strategy for this company. And here, I just welcome any sort of thoughts or suggestions as to, why would you have an intellectual property strategy?
Well, it should go into your business plan.
Yeah.
Well,
part of the business plan to secure funding, absolutely.
Yeah, well, not just to secure funding, to be able to implement the plan.
Yeah.
Intellectual property rights are the protection of the investment in the technology, the branding, the design, or whatever it happens to be. So the strategy shows, first of all, how we're going to be able to raise the funding to pay for the prosecution, how we're going to give the insurance to be able to instruct people like you and maybe me, if we have to, enforce it. Of course, we're thinking of the next stage once the company gets off the ground, and we're hoping it's going to become very, very successful. Or a pathway to success. I mean, that's what I've been thinking anyway. But
and I think that's echoed again in some of the suggestions on Slido. So protect the IP, and then license the product, so the opportunity to commercialize it, make money from it, to protect the value of the business, and I suppose that's aligned with protecting interests in the short, medium, long term, securing the patents, which effectively is most valuable of intellectual property rights, and will deliver a lot of that, which we've discussed, and the same with and I think preserve principles is actually a very interesting one, and does come through more and more, which is that people have intellectual property and that creates a monopoly, but then it's that people try to use their licensing schemes and that monopoly in the licensing schemes in order to ensure that people are behaving in an ethical and appropriate manner. So taking those on board, I think probably when what's the aim of an intellectual property strategy, and I think this reflects what you've all said. I think there's two limbs to it, and we focused on the first limb, and that is to plan for how we identify, capture, manage, monetize, and enforce the intellectual property. And that's probably the most important limb. The limb that often gets forgotten, and one I really want to emphasize here, is how we identify third-party intellectual property, and then potentially design around, license, or invalidate that third-party intellectual property. And maybe the best way to think of it is this way: intellectual property is a sword, it is not a shield. So the ownership of intellectual property allows you to prevent others from using that intellectual property. It does not allow you to use that intellectual property. So it's perfectly conceivable that you implement intellectual property or you commercially exploit intellectual property, but still infringe somebody else's intellectual property. And so it's always important that in addition to identifying your own, you then also review third-party intellectual property, and what we call it then clear the way. So make sure that you're not infringing that intellectual property, and that there are a number of different ways to do that. We'll explore that in a little bit more detail. So I think to some extent we've already covered why we need the intellectual properties. We talk about what an intellectual property is, but why we need an intellectual property strategy. So I'll skip over this question, but I think it broadly it comes down to money, and a lot of you've mentioned value. So an intellectual property is some form of monopoly. And that obviously then reduces competition in the marketplace, which then reduces the negative pressures on your pricing. It improves your revenue, which of course all works to improve your profit. There are then also, in some instances, tax efficiencies with intellectual property. If you're that's particularly the case if you are a domestic manufacturer. So there's something called patent box, which enables you to take a patent that applies to the product being manufactured, and in some instances reduce your corporation tax down from 20 to 10%. International businesses will also structure their business in such a way that the profit center is in a tax low jurisdiction. So, for example, Ireland. And then they will license out the intellectual property to other jurisdictions. So effectively, they are able to move the revenue from those other jurisdictions into that tax efficient jurisdiction, for example, Ireland, and pay less tax. It offers alternative revenue streams, and some of you touched on this. So effectively, you are able to assign the intellectual property if it's needed, or you can license it if it's needed, and that can generate revenue. Or if the business, or just by virtue of it existing, it increases the value. So when investors are looking at the business, they want to see that you have these monopolies within your business, and once you can show that you have that intellectual property, it increases the value. I've talked about the need to clear the way, and so it avoids infringement. Nobody wants to launch a product only to be on the receiving end of a claim from a competitor trying to prevent you from exploiting that product. And it also creates something called mutually assured destruction. And so as businesses grow and they become more sophisticated and they build an intellectual property portfolio, then effectively you are in a position where if somebody threatens to sue you, you can threaten to sue them, and both parties accept the détente because of this threat of mutually assured destruction. So just to pick up some preliminary points before we actually go into what an intellectual property strategy looks like. The first is that I'd really encourage you, any business, to identify who's responsible for managing the intellectual property. So identifying who within the organization has that responsibility and empowering them to take ownership of that. Then if you're operating a group of companies, it's very important to understand who within that group of companies owns the intellectual property, and then on what basis are the other groups with other companies within the group using it. So for example, a license, and that's quite an important and then obviously that builds into the tax efficiencies that we were talking about before. And then the final thing is to think about who the main competitors are, because that will come relevant when we're clearing the way, and who the main developers of the related technology are, because again, that will be relevant to clearing the way. So if we bring this back to our startup vault, and we are, when we're looking at the main competitors, so I'm guessing, for example, maybe Octopus, Tesla, etc., but also the main developers of related technology. So that will be the manufacturers of the solar panels, the batteries, and so on and so forth. So you need to be looking at that entire supply chain. And then the final point is to think about, okay, well, given my business, what intellectual property is likely to be the most relevant? Yeah. So what is, and what I mean by that is that some businesses, that they'll be doing a lot of R&D, a lot of inventions effectively, and their patents will be their probably their most important asset. Others will be engaged in, say, software development, and their business, the most important intellectual property is likely to be copyright, for example. And then the final point is what jurisdictions are relevant to our company, and that will then inform where you want to have intellectual property. So let's assume that we're a UK entity. Then obviously the UK is important, but then also where these panels and batteries and the home hub is being manufactured is important. And then also the key markets for the sale of that system are important. So, for example, the UK, but we may have an eye on the EU, we may have an eye on the US as examples. Yeah. So just looking at our startup, Faults, what intellectual property do you think is likely to be most relevant to us? So we, again, just to reiterate, we've got these technical improvements in the solar panels. We've got software that's being developed. We've got a beautiful home hub, which looks good. We've got a team of people doing the R&D. So any thoughts as to what intellectual property we need to be sort of focusing on?
Well, I think that the brand is going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we want to protect that with trademarks in the UK, our potential competitors' jurisdictions, and our potential markets. So if we hope to get into the European Union, we want to be thinking about a European Union trademark. And if we hope to operate in other countries, we might be thinking of the Madrid Protocol and registering there. But you're quite right. The people suggested with patents, we've got technology. I don't know if it's going to be worth shattering technology. If it is, trade secrets, that we're about to see outside of it. I remember giving a talk at something which Rob Elias was one of our speakers was chairing, and I said there's two ways of protecting an idea. One way is to disclose it to the world and get a monopoly from a patent system, although they can always be revoked if the patent office finds that maybe it shouldn't be granted. But the other way is just simply to keep your trap shut. So that won't work if there's a team which is working in parallel and discovers the technology itself without having to refer to you or reverse engineers when you put it on the market. I
think that's absolutely right. And just to tease that out, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail as we go on. You know, you've got this process. Any strategy to some extent is looking at what intellectual property you can capture and register, but to some extent you may get to the point where you say, actually, I don't want to register it because it's public, because that maybe would make it public. And so it follows that actually this should be treated as confidential information, as a trade secret. And so you actually sort of pivot the other way. But I think well done, everybody. I think we've got all the main rights there: patents, designs, trademarks, copyright. There may be, and then trade secrets. Patents for the solar panels, battery system, and the home hub, the design for the home hub, the trademark for our brand, the copyright for the software, confidential information, which is trade secrets, and then a niche one, database rights, looking at our consumers, for example. So what jurisdictions may be most relevant to us. And what I want to do is break that down into where our R&D is taking place, where our manufacturing is taking place, and what markets are likely to be relevant to us. Now, look, the reality is that this is a fantasy company. Our R&D may be taking place anywhere, but let's assume. Well, I'll let you decide where it's taking place. If you want to vote, UK. So so we've got the UK, US, EU, China, and the reality is, of course, that R&D can take place in any of these jurisdictions, and indeed may take place across more than one jurisdiction. I think probably for our fantasy company, we'll assume it's the UK. The R&D is taking place in the UK, but obviously we'll keep an eye on China, the US, and the EU. Then what jurisdictions are relevant to us, and in particular, sorry, where's the manufacturing taking place? Now, I appreciate, again, we're a fantasy company, but yeah, do give some thought actually as to what the reality is here. Where does the manufacturing of solar panels, batteries, etc. take place? And absolutely, typically the answer is China or India is increasingly a manufacturing hub, sometimes Southeast Asia as well. So given the vote sits with China, we'll say China for our manufacturing hub. And then the final one is what are our main markets? So we're a UK company, we're probably selling into the UK initially, but where else may we sell? US, EU, that's absolutely right. Probably not India or China, because we probably won't be competitive, at least from a price point, in those jurisdictions.
What about the IFC? The Gulf, let's try to say the IFC, the Gulf cooperation countries. I mean, there's massive markets like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is, particularly with solar panels, that could be quite a big, quite an important jurisdiction, and particularly as they transition away from oil. Absolutely.
And they can't do it themselves. At least they're getting the capacity, but and there are lots of universities from Europe and America which have got campuses there for that purpose, to get a research capability.
So just to reiterate, we've got, in terms of jurisdictions that are important to us for our IP strategy, the UK, EU, US, China, potentially India, potentially the United Arab Emirates. So how do we develop this IP strategy for our startup vault? Well, I think it's helpful to look at it through the prism of 5 points. The first is capturing that intellectual property. The second is then prosecuting it, and by that I mean filing and registering it. The third is then the launch of the product itself. The third is then the commercialization of the intellectual property, so for example, selling it or licensing it. And the fifth is the enforcement of that intellectual property if needed. So how do we capture intellectual property? Well, it's helpful to differentiate between registered and unregistered intellectual property. So in our example, on registered, we're talking about patents. So that is something so this is something that gives you a monopoly for 20 years, which covers an invention, which has technical application. A registered design, which can give you a monopoly of up to 25 years in relation to the aesthetic of the design, for want of a better description. And then trademarks, which can give you a monopoly indefinitely over a particular brand. And then you have unregistered rights. So that's designs, goodwill, copyright, database right, and confidential information. Unregistered designs are effectively, well, all, sorry, I should say pretty much, sorry, unregistered designs prevent the copying of a design in certain circumstances. Goodwill is effectively an unregistered trademark, so it prevents people from, third parties, from misleading consumers that they are you or are associated with you. Copyright prevents the copying of certain types of work, so for example literary work, artistic works, etc. Database rights the same. It prevents the extraction of a part or the whole of a database. And then the confidential information prevents third parties from using information which they, for purposes that that the information was not disclosed for. And as I've alluded to, the distinction, or sort of the main feature of registered rights is that if you want them, you need to file for them with an intellectual property office. Typically, once you have them, they are a more powerful right than the unregistered rights, although that's not always the case. People comfortable with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do we capture the intellectual property? Well, whether or not it's registered or unregistered, there's a couple of things that you need to be thinking about. Or a couple of groups of people that you need to be thinking about: employees and then third parties. So with your employee, it's very important that you have an employment contract in place, but also that that employment contract specifies that you are the owner of any intellectual property which they generate during the course of their employment. And then it's helpful to have an intellectual property policy that's in place which supplements that and explains to employees what their obligations are around identifying and registering and protecting intellectual property. And then when it comes to third parties, effectively what you need to be thinking about is whether an agreement should be put in place, and if so, ensuring that the agreement protects your intellectual property. So typically, if you're entering into a preliminary negotiations with a third party, you'd want a non-disclosure agreement in place so that you can transfer confidential information securely. If you then decide to engage with them on a research and development, you need to have an R&D agreement in place, and this effectively will identify who owns the intellectual property that's generated in any invention, etc. The same applies for designs. So if they're designing something for you, who owns the design? Developers, so if people are writing software for you, who owns the copyright? Consultancy agreements, manufacturing agreements, so on and so forth. The key thing in each of them is that you have an assignment in place which transfers the intellectual property from that third party to you. Just to pick up on a few pitfalls before we go any further. Do be careful with open source software. It can be a very helpful tool. Most code is written with it in some way, but people don't necessarily pay heed to actually the terms upon which the open source software has been licensed, and sometimes the license precludes commercial use. And if you've written code with open source software that is then commercialized, extracting that open source software is an extremely arduous and time-consuming process. The second thing is that typically if you engage in these early discussions, particularly with third parties, that says, okay, any intellectual property that's generated is owned by me, it will elicit a hard discussion. And you may well find that these third parties are saying, no, actually, we want to own it, or so on and so forth. And a compromise that's often reached, and it's an understandable one, is joint ownership. So we say, okay, look, well, why don't we both jointly own the intellectual property? Try and avoid this at all costs. And the reason for that is that it obfuscates things. So practically, who is going to file the intellectual property? Who is going to pay for the prosecution costs of that intellectual property? But also it can actually present some real fundamental issues when you come to exploit that intellectual property, because the law on joint ownership will vary depending upon the intellectual property and the jurisdiction. So it may be that a joint owner is entitled to exploit the intellectual property in the UK, but not France. And in those circumstances, you end up having to go back to the joint owner and renegotiate, but you do so in a much worse position because the joint owner knows that they can extract value because you are prevented from doing what you want to do. Rather, the better way is to say, okay, somebody may own it and the other party may be licensed to it. That's a good way of avoiding joint ownership. Or you may look to do something alternative, like divide it up by jurisdiction. On improvements, do think about, typically it's an ongoing, the development of a product is an ongoing process. Do make sure that you're capturing or identifying who owns the improvements in products. So for example, you can see you enter into an R&D agreement, you develop a product, you own the intellectual property. You then approach the manufacturer, but the manufacturer during the manufacturing process says, actually, we can do this, this, and this to improve the process. You need to be capturing the IP around that. And the final thing is just on records. Do be relatively vigilant around keeping records of these agreements and the intellectual property.
Can I just stop you here?
Yeah.
Cambridge, you gave a very good example. You gave us a precedent called the disclosure form, with which employees who actually invent something or create something are required to hand that over to their employers. And I found that was very, very helpful. I've even used it, or at least recommended to one of my clients that they use it. Yeah. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in fact, we'll come to that. But if anybody would like an example in disclosure form, if they drop me an email, I can send it through to them at no charge. But effectively, it's and you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. One of the things that you need to be thinking about when trying to institute within your organization, and this is particularly as it gets bigger and bigger, is think about having this disclosure form. And this is about encouraging employees and third parties from sitting down to sit down and effectively write down what they think they have invented or designed or branded. So this form in general will have some common features. So it'll have the title of the invention or the design or the trademark. It'll have the date of the invention, design, or trademark. It'll have the people that have invented it or designed it. And that's important because from an entitlement perspective, who owns it. And if to the degree to which these people are third parties, it'll then identify the contractual basis upon which Volt, our startup, owns the intellectual property. And then it'll have it'll talk about the potential commercial application of the invention to design or trademark. So what value is this bringing? How will it be used? And then what competitive advantages is it giving over third parties? And that's really important because we'll come on to it, because effectively we need to make a cost benefit analysis. We need to make a judgment as to whether or not to register the intellectual property. And so we need to know the value that it's going to bring. And then if we're dealing with patents, there's some other things that you specifically want to talk about. So you need to ask them to disclose the stage of the development of the invention, the problem that the invention solves. It needs to describe the invention in detail. It needs to talk through the closest prior art, and it needs to explain why the invention is new and inventive over each piece of prior art. And so this is really important because it allows the recipient of the form to take an informed view as to whether or not it's possible to get a patent for this. You can't get a patent unless the invention is new and inventive over the prior art. A similar approach applies for designs. You need to know what the designer's nationality or residence is, and that's because for certain design rights, that's important when establishing whether or not the design right subsists. You need to understand the stage of development of the design, have the design drawings because they may need to be filed. You need to describe the closest prior art, and you need to explain why the design, is novel over each piece of prior art. And then we get to trademarks, and then here we need to think about, okay, well, what's the word that we're trying to register, but also are there any logos? So it's not just about the word, but the whole entire style or figurative design of the brand. Are there any slogans? Now, slogans sometimes can be registered as trademarks, sometimes they can't. Any domain names that need to be registered, and then also any social media handles that need to be registered. Nobody wants to have registered a trademark, etc., only to find out that the domain name hasn't been registered or the social media handles haven't been captured. And for that reason, it frustrates the use of that. And this happens to the best of us. True story. Google forgot to renew its domain google.com. This is around 2016. A entrepreneurial person was looking to register their domain name at roughly about 1 minute past midnight, and trying to understand how this all works. Googled Google's domain to understand how they'd registered it, noticed that it was available to purchase, and purchased it. 8 hours later, the purchaser got a panicked phone call saying we've let this lapse inadvertently, and they bought it back for something like $6,000. And I say something like 6,000 because they effectively spelt the name Google upside down in numerals when buying it back. Anyway, my point being is that it's all important to think about all of these things. So you've got this invention disclosure form. You've captured your registered rights, with the potential registered rights, and then this needs to go to a review committee. Now, who that is will depend upon your business. You may deal with it internally. You may go to an external patent or trademark attorney or solicitor or barrister. But effectively, what this review committee is doing is saying, okay, well, look, in principle, can we register any rights? What's the cost of registering these rights? What's the commercial advantage of that? And then they're applying that cost benefit analysis that I talked about. So is there value in this? And then what they will do is they will probably conduct a search so to identify whether or not the registers are clear, i.e. there's no rights that you're unaware of, and so you can register that brand, and then you'll make a decision. And as we talked about before, of course, sometimes you may get to the point where you think, actually, on the cost benefit analysis, it's not warranted to register these intellectual property rights, and actually we're going to keep these as confidential information, and they become part of our trade secrets. Just some other things that I just want to bring out. Do try and this is returning really to your employees and to some extent third-party contractors, have an induction with them, talk about the importance of intellectual property, train them periodically to renew that. A lot of businesses operate an incentive scheme around disclosing intellectual property, and so effectively, if you take patents, for example, you will have a patent that so people will be rewarded for filing the invention disclosure form. That may be a modest reward of, say, £50. They may then get a much more significant reward on the application for the patent. They may get an even more significant reward on the grant of the patent, and they may get an even more significant reward for every time it's renewed. And in this way, you incentivize the disclosure, which is great. You reward innovation, which is great. But also it can be an incentive to retain people on a long-term basis, because they will see the potential for getting these rewards over the lifetime of the right, say 20 years, and so will stay with the business accordingly. Just on trade secrets, confidential information, do give some thought about compartmentalization. So taking the physical, taking your office space and thinking, okay, is there, a door, and I put certain confidential information behind that door, whatever that may be, and probably more realistically, a classic example of that is lab work, and then probably more realistically these days is digital. You may have a central filing system, but do you put certain information behind a confidentiality wall, which prevents prevents certain employees from seeing it? And then exit interviews, and this is really valuable. When it doesn't have to be sort of aggressive, but just saying to employees when they leave, look, this is our intellectual property, we value it, and we will be holding you to your restrictions associated with that intellectual property. There's a lot there. I'm conscious I've taken up quite a bit of time, so bear with me. I'll try and do the next bits quite quickly. Everybody happy? Yeah, good. Okay. So we've talked about that capturing exercise, and we talked about the capturing exercise which relates to the unregistered intellectual property. So that's around the agreements that you put in place. And then we talked about the capturing exercise in relation to the registered intellectual property. So that's the invention disclosure that takes place. So once you've got that registered intellectual property, what do you do? Well, you need to file it and prosecute it. And so that means filing it to the intellectual property office and then prosecuting it through that intellectual property office, but also the other intellectual property offices that are relevant to you. So we talked about with Vault that the UK is important, that Europe's important, the US, China, and India. So what we will probably be doing with our patents is making a priority filing in the UK. That's month 0. And that effectively is a document filed at the UK intellectual property which defines the scope of your monopoly. That's your flag in the sand. Now, there will be a certain cost associated with that, but the good thing is that you don't need to really do anything for another 12 months. And so what you can do is we can look at whether or not the business is going well, whether or not we've got the money, whether or not we're generating the sales, whether or not the invention that applies to our solar panels or our battery is really delivering. But after that 12-month period, we then need to make a decision. Are we going to abandon the patent, or are we going to continue to prosecute it, both in the UK, but potentially abroad? And if we're going abroad, that means filing typically, there is no one way, but typically filing an international application. So it's sometimes referred to as a PCT application or a WIPO application. That's with the World Intellectual Property Office. And then that's another cost point. Now, what the World Intellectual Property Office will do is they will conduct a search and they will give a preliminary opinion as to whether or not the patent's likely to be valid. And that can be really helpful because, again, it informs that decision as to whether or not you want to continue that cost-benefit analysis, whether or not you want to continue, whether or not you want to incur further costs, and whether or not it's going to deliver value. And then 30 to 31 months from the priority application, you need to be filing a regional or national filing. So whether or not that's the European, so that for us will be the European Patent Office, it will be the US Patent Office, the Indian Patent Office, and the Chinese Patent Office. And then there'll be a more substantive examination, and potentially the patent will come to grant, say, some 54 to 55 months later. And then you need to renew it every year. And the thing that I really want to draw out here is that each one of these represents a cost point, and at each one of these stages you need to be redoing the cost benefit analysis to understand whether or not you want to continue to incur costs and it's going to deliver value for you. And you obviously do that by reference to your business. And to some extent, the same applies to designs, albeit it's a much shorter timetable. So you have to file an international application within 6 months. That's then published, and then you'll then get any objections from any national offices after that. You have to renew every 5 years for a registered design. Typically, it will depend on the jurisdiction. And then with trademarks, again, a shorter timetable. So you'll file, you have to register your international application within 6 months, and that's the Madrid protocol that Jane talked about. And then you typically within 12 to 18 months, the national offices will look at it and decide whether or not to renew, whether or not to grant it. And then every 10 years, you've got a renewal. Right, so we've been doing all of this, and obviously you can see that because of the timetables for some of these intellectual property rights, they are going to bleed into the launch of our solar panels, battery, and so on and so forth. And so what we need to be doing, what do we need to do as we go to launch those products? Well, this is a freedom to operate search. This is clearing the way for the patents, designs, and trademarks. And so what you're doing is you are looking to identify whether or not there are any third parties who have intellectual property that you may infringe if you launch these products. And if you identify those rights, then you've got a number of options. The first is you can design around. So you take your product and you can say, okay, I can deliver my product in a different way, which won't infringe their intellectual property. You could approach them, the third party that is, and ask for a license. That can be high risk because effectively you are notifying that third party that you are concerned that you will infringe their rights. And if they decline, and so they may extract a heavy price for the license, or if they decline a license, you run the risk of being sued when you launch. Or you can invalidate their intellectual property. And so this is effectively, you look at their intellectual property and you say, I don't think this was properly granted. I think that there is prior art out there, so previous inventions out there, which prior disclose this invention, this design, etc. And so you can challenge that validity. Or you just accept the risk. And this is a perfectly valid approach where you just say, look, actually, I don't think that this third party will be commercially motivated to sue me, will be has the finances to sue me, will maybe even won't even become aware of what I'm doing, and so I accept that risk. And actually, probably before you get to this stage, if you've got insurance, that informs that decision as well. Or of course, you can go back to the drawing board and we can discontinue our solar panels or battery, whatever it might be. So how do we commercialize intellectual property? Oops, daisy. Well, you effectively, some people use intellectual property just purely as a defensive tool. So this is to say, I've got this intellectual property. I'm not really going to police the market, but it's here that in the case that somebody approaches me, then I've got the weapons, the sword to fight back. Other people adopt a more aggressive approach. They look to police the market, and they will be looking to preclude third parties from operating, so effectively to maintain the monopoly. And in doing that, you generate value, albeit indirectly. It's very difficult to put a figure on it. More tangible ways of commercializing your intellectual property is just to license it out. Now that will affect your monopoly because third parties will be entitled to do what you are doing, but it also means that you can get revenue from your competitors, which can be quite attractive. You can, it may be that you have intellectual property that you're not using, and if so, you can assign that intellectual property to third parties. Or alternatively, you can use the intellectual property to get tax efficiencies, which we briefly touched on. So the final slide, and you've all been very patient, which I'm grateful, is enforcement. And this might be slightly counterintuitive, given that I'm a litigator, Jane is a litigator, but in general, you want to avoid enforcing your intellectual property really at all costs. You need to think of it as a last resort. And the adage that only the lawyers win is often sadly true. Now that doesn't preclude enforcement, but I just want to couch where you're coming from when looking at enforcement. And the reason is but that being said, is there is a point at which you will need to enforce, because the value of the intellectual property will be diminished in the event that third parties are just exploiting it without paying you a license fee, etc. So when you come to enforcement, some of the things that you need to think about are which jurisdiction to enforce in, the merits of the action, but also the predictability of that jurisdiction, whether or not there is a likely counterclaim from the other side strategy. So yes, you're using an enforcement, but it should be really only as a tool to secure the settlement that you want. It's effectively about, and in that respect, you should almost see it as a limb to the overarching negotiations that you're having with your competitor on the other side. You should then also think about whether or not the decision's appealable, and then you should think about that cost to a final unappealable decision. And then finally, you need to think about whether or not there's going to be any adverse costs award. So, for example, in the UK, if you enforce your intellectual property and you're successful, then you can recover a proportion of your costs from the other side. Equally, if you're unsuccessful, the other side can recover a proportion of their costs from the other side. And then going back to the strategy, what's that settlement that you want? What looks good from the litigation? Do you want them to stop using their products in the marketplace? Do you want them to design around your invention? Do you want them to take a license, etc.? And just to give you an example of how all of this sort of can come together, not always true, but it can come together. Let's say that you have a UK patent and a German patent now, and the infringement's taking place across all of Europe. Then you really got the choice of a UK enforcement action or a German enforcement action. Now, in Germany, it's changed recently, so this doesn't quite apply, but in Germany, they've got a very pro-patentee system, and you can commence your infringement proceedings, and you can get a decision at first instance, potentially within 6 to 12 months. And if you're successful and you pay a bond, then you can enforce an injunction which prevents the third party from being on the marketplace, and that is often enough to get them to settle. Very powerful tool. And in particular, what you have is that the invalidity action, so if the other side challenge the validity of your patent, that's held by addressed by separate court, and sometimes the validity decision will fall after the injunction has been granted. So effectively what you get is this infringement decision in your favor, it settles, and validity is never determined. That's a really powerful tool. And also in Germany, it's quite cost effective. They don't have a lot of the obligations of disclosure. They don't have the sort of oral tradition that we have, the cross-examination, and so the trials are shorter, so that in general the costs can be better. So you take all of those things, and actually Germany looks very good. But equally, if you actually look at it and say, okay, well, hang on, when do I get my final unappealable decision? Well, the final there's an automatic right of appeal in Germany for both infringement and validity decisions. And that appeal actually takes between 2 to 3 years. And what's more, actually, is when you look at the costs, so you have to look at not just the first instance, but also the appeal. And you also have to look at the infringement action and the nullity action, because that'll be appealed too. So you end up having 4 costs rather than just the one. And also the court fees are quite high. So if your initial strategy of getting that rocket injunction isn't successful, then actually the time to a final unappealed decision and the cost can be quite prohibitive. And that's why that's why you really need to what I'm trying to describe is just really be very granular and very exacting with your lawyers as to what the strategy is, what the timetable is, what's the right jurisdiction, etc., and game out all of those factors before you engage in that. That's it from me. I hope that's constructive. I don't know if we have time, but very happy to take questions if it helps.
Well, that was excellent. I think we just move on very quickly. Is there any question around the table for Anthony? And online, anybody who wants to raise an issue? We do have your email address, don't we? And I'm sure there will be lots of questions. Certainly there are lots that I can think of, but I do know we've got to get a long program through.
Yeah, fair enough. In which case I will leave you in peace. But thanks for taking the time. It's really appreciated. And do feel free to reach out if you do have any questions or concerns, or if it's helpful to circulate that invention disclosure form.
Well, thank you so much. That was very, very helpful. And I didn't know we could improve on what you gave to the students at Cambridge, but you have. Certainly in quantity and in depth. And I'm very, very grateful.
Well, take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, I'm very, very glad to welcome our next speaker, Geraint McGrath of the Foresight Group. And earlier this year, we had a celebration of St David's Day at the Guildhall. And on our table, which was presided, of course, by our excellent Chair, Gwenthian, was Geraint. And Geraint has, I think, 2 responsibilities. First, of course, you're a director of the Foresight Group, Foresight Group, but also I believe that you are an advisor on the Wales Investment Fund, which was recently announced by the British Businessman. And that's a lot of money, I think £150 million, which is made available through intermediate institutions, and that should be powering an awful lot of companies in this nation. So if I may present Diwrnod, and it's very good of you to come up all the way from London. May affect you usually.
Cardiff normally, but yeah.
Well, that's a long way to
Yeah,
go.
been a long way to just start.
And I'm very, very grateful.
No problem at all. Thank you very much.
I'm just opening up the presentation that you sent.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you. My bad, we just sent it to you, so.
Very good.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Very, very kind. So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes today just chatting through equity funding as a general theme. But I can give a bit of background as well on Foresight and Investment Fund for Wales. So just myself, first of all, Jay mentioned, so Gary McGrath, I'm a senior investment manager at Foresight Group. Can you just slide 2?
I'm nearly there. We're not quite sharing as yet.
Oh, it's not, is it? Okay, no problem.
Not yet.
Okay, fine. So Gary McGrath, senior investment manager at Foresight Group. Today I'll just chat through a few things I mentioned. First thing is I'll just give a bit of an introduction on Foresight and also the Investment Fund for Wales, as you just mentioned. I'll give a bit of background on what is equity funding, to the extent that is useful, and also just to those who are interested in equity funding, how you can position yourself, what we look for, what others look for, and some common performance as well. So just to chat through, this is my fault, so I'm sure we're on. So
I think we're there now. As long as everybody can see the slides now.
great stuff. I'll just chat through Foresight briefly. So Foresight itself is a FTSE 250 listed investment manager. We have around 12 billion of funds under management. The majority of that's in infrastructure investments, so wind farms and solar panels and other kind of things around the UK and also the world. But we also have a reasonable size investment in private equity in the UK, and that's investing in SMEs across the UK. And we're actually one of the UK's most active investors in that part of the market. So we've been doing that for about 40 years. And in that time, we've invested in all sorts of businesses, or all sorts of size in that SME bracket, and across all different types of sectors as well. Our kind of model is a regional model. So we have offices throughout the UK, and we've just opened an office in Cardiff. And I'm very pleased to also have a presence here in M-SParc as well. So with regards to that model, we've reasonably opened an office presence in Wales, is because Jay mentioned we've just been we're very glad to be given the mandate to run the equity part of the Investment Fund for Wales. So I'll just give a bit of background on that. So the British Business Bank has a number of regional funds, and it's recently launched the Investment Fund for Wales. That's a £130 million pot of money, which is going to 33 different parts. So there's a smaller loan part, which does loans from 25k to 100k, James.
Yes, yeah.
Helping James in the room as well, and James is responsible for that part as well from half BCRS. So that's 25k to 100k loans for businesses throughout Wales, James.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's also a kind of larger loans part, which is loans of 100k to 2 million, and that's administered by FW Capital, which is part of the Development Bank of Wales. And then there's an equity part, which is equity checks up to £5 million, and that's a 50 million pot of money in total. That's being managed by Foresight Group. So that's kind of whistle stop tour of the kind of context of my conversation. I'll just chat on, move on to slide 4, if that's okay. Oh, that's like slide 3. Actually. Delete the slide. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right.
It certainly is.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, so just a bit of background on what is equity funding. So I think the first thing to mention is the context here is obviously lots of businesses at any stage really might need funding for the right reasons. If you're looking for funding, there's a number of options. You can obviously get debt funding is an option, but also equity funding is an option. Now, equity funding is not for everyone. Ultimately, the key concept of equity funding is that someone will come in, give you equity and take a share in the business. Usually, sometimes minorities, sometimes the majority share in the business. That clearly isn't for everyone, but for a variety of different reasons. But for those businesses where that could be an option, then it's potentially okay. The type of equity investors can come in all different shapes and sizes as well, from angel investors, which are often individuals who are might have expertise at a particular business area, through to institutional investors like Foresight, like others, the VGF or RBC or those types. So lots of different venture capital or both biotech investors across the UK. And each of those investors will usually invest in a different part of the market, whether it's early stage venturing through to kind of buyout, later stage businesses. As I said, Foresight ourselves, we're looking at the SME market, so right from the venturing through to the kind of growth checks and the earlier stage, the kind of smaller buyout checks as well. Ultimately, there's a focus across all these investors. Vast majority are looking to make a commercial return. So that's the kind of key thing to think of when you approach to invest. How can you be compelling, make them confident that they can make a commercial return on that investment? There's also a theme around alignment with management. So with the equity investment, normally speaking, if the company does well, everyone does well, and that's the goal. So you align with all of the shareholders of the business. So it's in everyone's best interest to drive the business forward. And then there's a patient approach as well. So most investors will look to that kind of 5-year-ish period of investment. Some will be a bit longer, some will be a bit shorter, but it's a long-term horizon investment. I think someone mentioned the other day that the average hold of a private investor now longer than the average marriage in UK, which is very impressive. But still, that's very interesting stat. I'm not sure if it's true, but I like it, so people use it. Let's move on to the next slide. So just a bit on kind of how equity funding can help a business. First and foremost, capital. So capital is an important kind of fuel to grow for growth. But depending on the investor, certain investors can also bring different skill sets. So as I said, the first thing from an investor point of view, certainly from our point of view, the vast majority of investors is people. So we'll be working with the team to make sure we can help grow that business. And whether that's bringing on and using our network to help grow the business, providing that kind of financial strategic support, but ultimately look to drive value in the business over the whole period. The other thing that is also having an eye on that potential exit, whether that's through another investor coming on board or through a trade sale at some point in time, just helping prepare our business for that next stage of investment.
Can I ask a question here? It used to be the case that with an exit plan was a flotation on the AIM. I asked about that not very long ago at a funding roadshow to launch the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, and I was put in my place by the UKR that said, no, you certainly don't want to use that. I was just wondering how on earth you do get capital on that stage, because in America, what it would be NASDAQ. It would be the well, that's where how we get startups, basically. Silicon Valley Bank or whatever it happens to be gets them started. Angels and local VCs get them flying, and then they go to Wall Street. It's that last bit. And I've asked it at several Northern Powerhouse roadshows, and we give much the same answer. You can't get there. You can't go straight to the market in this country, or at least there seem to be restrictions, and that's a shame. And Tony Blair recently, in an article for Tony Blair Foundation, actually suggested that we should try and get institutions which will float it.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think when I had my own hat on, which is kind of corporate finance, trying to move businesses onto that next level, we often take an approach of kind of a multi-track approach, which might be talking to institutional investors, like directly talking to trade, and potentially looking to an exit onto the IPO market as well. I think in recent years, the IPO market has been a little bit more difficult. But I think it is an option. It just depends on the scale and what we're trying to achieve as well.
But in America, and I think in India now, but increasingly, it's actually the natural course of progress. You've had your £5 million from from people like Foresight Group, and you want to, and you've done very well with it. Invested it wisely, and you're doing great. And you want to go to the next stage, become a public company.
It'd be super interesting to see the scale of those listings on that. I think they're quite large.
And
that's the biggest problem, is that gap between what makes an investment, an IPO on other markets. of a scale to actually make that work.
Well,
That's
that's-
small, it's a bit of a problem, I think.
Yeah. But that's what AIM is supposed to do. Yeah. I mean, it is necessary. It's one of the things holding back innovation in this country.
It's an interesting point, and hopefully it can be one which is improved.
Yeah. And then just before we started, Wendy and I thought about a nice capital market in Wales. We used to have a Wales stock exchange, and yeah, we did until 1973.
Wow.
As there was also a Northern exchange in Manchester, Scottish one in Glasgow, and it was used in 1973.
Fantastic. Didn't know that. It's at the end days.
Something worth to look at. Yes.
Sorry, please.
That's okay, no problem at all. You take questions. Let's move on to just some illustrative costs and structures. So, as I mentioned, the key thing from an equity funding point of view is that you have a new investor in the business, and then you should take a minority or sometimes majority stake. And that's usually done through ordinary shares, but it can be other structures. I won't go into those details now, but ultimately the main thing is that you are giving up some shares in the business, which is a conceptually important thing. And it's not without costs as well, because as in the case of some bank debt and other debt as well, there are fees to pay when you take on equity investment, whether it's diligence fees or arrangement fees. Again, won't go into massive detail on that, but just something to keep in mind as well really well. Just to touch on kind of the process before we jump into what we look for. This is our foresight process, and it's different for everyone, but the main message to get across here is that this is not a necessarily quick thing to do. Equity investment can take a little while. So the main thing is to be very mindful of that when looking at investment. It could take anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 7 months, right, or even longer. From those first conversations to actually get and check the door. Just be very mindful of the kind of length of time that process can take. We'll spend a little bit of time on the next slide, which is how to position yourself on what we look for. So the first thing I want to touch on the left-hand column, so done that, that's kind of what foresight look at. But generally speaking, from an equity investor point of view, I think there's 4 main areas which we look at. The first thing, and this is especially important in the SME market, is management team. So ultimately, when you're investing in a small business, the management team is probably the single most important thing in that business. We have to do a good management team. It's going to be really tricky for that investment to work. So that means a management team that has a vision for the growth of the business and understand how we can actually develop that business, and hopefully some sector expertise, maybe some experience in doing it before. And be a vision of how to scale that business. To point out on this slide as well, this is a bit of a weakness. You're very clearly to see a business which ticks all these boxes, but it's just helpful context. That's what we look for. Then on the strategic aspect, so ultimately a business plan which is well thought through and has a clear strategy, which has clear competitive advantages. We've talked about barriers to entry such as IP. It's a super important thing here, whether that's know-how or registered IP. Either way, something which shows that there is a barrier to entry is really helpful. And also a view to what the next step is. So how does that exit get realised, whether that's through an IPO or through a trade sale or through further investment in 3 years' time. The third strand then I would say is the market. And I characterise this in 2 parts. I think the first thing is the market itself. So it's helpful if the market is growing, if the market is large enough. We see a lot of business plans which on Facebook look compelling, but actually are addressing such a small market that it's going to be really hard for them to ever achieve scale. So that's the first aspect, is the actual market dynamics. And the second aspect is management's understanding of those dynamics. And management need to have a really good, clear view on the market itself and what part of the market they're addressing. To give an example, you often see people fall in the trap of saying, well, we're part of this market, which is £6 trillion, it's a massive market. But in reality, not, you're a small niche of that. And that's absolutely fine. But understanding that part of the market you're actually addressing and having a plan to address that is really important. And then financials. The thing which we spend most time on investors looking at numbers. Again, early stage businesses might not have much historical numbers, but that doesn't mean you can't have a forecast which is well thought through and which has assumptions which are underpinned by thought through a thought through business plan. That the numbers show a position which has attractive margins, that has a position which has a revenue or business model which makes sense in the numbers, and shows a revenue which has maybe a stickiness to it or a repeatability to it is always attractive. And making sure that you have a good view on the cash leaving the business. So it's not unusual for early stage businesses to be loss making, but after understanding how that loss making business turns into a profit, how much cash you need to get there, how long that's going to take, and the runway to get there, it's really important. Any questions on that side?
If we want to go and get some investment or some lending, how do we do it? Do we go to a business bank or do we go to one of the institutions?
It's a good question. I think my advice would be to try and talk to as many people who've done it before as you can, and then try and speak to as many investors as practical, and all practical to get a feel for the market, because I wouldn't necessarily. Most people are more than happy to have a conversation.
Yeah. So I mean, we've got an angel network here, haven't we?
Yeah.
So talk to some of them, some of these guys,
Absolutely, yeah.
and women. But also
speak as well. So it's kind of that bit around. We try. If it's not us, we try and introduce it to other people in the network as well. So I think just tapping into the knowledge that exists in places like M-SParc is really important, because I think there is a really good interconnectivity around the place.
That's certainly the vision, isn't it?
Yes, and that's how it happens, isn't it? We have conversations with businesses. We find out the requirements or where they're actually at, or if they need connections, or if they need investment, or what sort of investment they're thinking about. That's when we probably learn by anybody really, and angels can plan actions.
Exactly. And there's some interesting, that we're more specialist equity investments in. There's some interesting databases around, or lists of investors who look at certain things as well. But as I said, I think the key thing, quite frankly, is always happy to kind of have a conversation. The reality is most businesses we speak to won't be for us at that particular time. That's just the way we give it. But it's just trying to make sure we are helpful as well, and we give that feedback, and whether that's through introductions or actual feedback on the business plan itself. It's something we love to do. This is just a summary slide of the kind of things which, how best to prepare. So the growth plan, the business plan, because what I'm saying, just having that one look through. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have that nailed down before you speak to people either. You can always have this initial conversation as an event, but you will need that to progress. That's usually showing a plan which goes 3, 4, 5, 6 years in the future. But again, with good assumptions underpinned by the market, underpinned by the business model, which kind of makes sense. Having clarity on the burn rate, the cash requirements, and how much funding you need is obviously an important part of that. And then again, just to make the mention, do a bit of research into potential funders, whether that's debt or that's equity, and how you can approach them.
I certainly refer people to the angels and the private equity people in there. And any questions on the table? Or from the room? Because this has been an excellent presentation, and it's complimented very much Anthony's. Because I want in a second, can I take this a little bit out of order? Because I said at the beginning that we have startups, but we also have scale-ups here. And although it's a very, very senior startup, I think, a very senior person running it, it is nevertheless a startup. Robin Elias was in charge of, was director of Beacon, managing director, I think, of Beacon Innovation, which was the development business for the hard technology, the varieties technology, seed varieties technology at the University of Aberystwyth, but also Swansea and here. And it's been a very, very successful enterprise. But right now,
Change of hats, change
yeah,
of theme.
well, I've started a new business, which is going to be exceedingly successful, which is already successful, called MDF Recovery. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, Rob. So thank you very much.
I'll just get the slides up for you.
So yes, I recently joined a company called MDF Recovery, and I'm the helping out of the business development manager. My role is to go out and make links to businesses which will be buying licenses from us. So we're very much a licensing business. So lots of things we've been hearing about today. And we use regular tools within our discussions within our business plan. It's all about things like NDAs, getting those signed off, progressing discussions with potential clients, getting them to a position where we can start agreeing the terms for our license. For that to happen, there's lots of hand-holding that we do, talking to those clients and getting them comfortable with the technology and demonstrating the technology as well. So that's we also have a pilot plant, which is currently in Manchester, where we will do that demonstration side of things to show that the technology works at a reasonable scale. So the scale we'll be able to do is currently demonstrated about 150 kilograms per hour, and the new licenses, the new plants that's going to be built next year, it's going to go up to 751 ton. In the future, it's staying up to about 2.5 to 5 tons per hour. So it's all about taking MDF. There's a lot of MDF kicking around there. It's like 45 million tons of waste MDF per year. So it's a big market. Currently, most of that waste is either landfilled or incinerated on a global basis. So clearly that's not very sustainable. And we've developed technology that sort of unlocks that potential, and we're exploiting that now in 2 key areas of application. That's recycling it back into MDF, which should be used by furniture manufacturers. So we've got a big company here called Cymru, beginning with manufacture their potential licensing in the future, and also into insulation materials. So you think about built environments that need to insulate our houses, it's actual fibre insulation is the product which we. That's the first 2 licenses that we've sold for a factory in Newtown, which in Mid Wales, to go to making insulation materials. So that's very exciting. So I have got a few slides. Let's slide there. Yeah. So yeah, milestones then for us. So we want to become the company to come to for recycling MDF. We are starting to see some competition there. So having patents, a strong family of patents, and growing that family of patents is increasingly important for us. And we've got patents granted in all the key territories. MDF is made globally. It's made in most places. So obvious big markets are places like Europe, USA, Asia. These are some of the areas we've got patent coverage in already. And we're a small company, there's only 7 of us. By having a patent, we've been able to negotiate with the OEMs, the equipment suppliers. So we have secured a great strategic partnership with the 3rd largest OEM in the sector, which is significant. And that's because we've got the IP, the patents behind the technology. And we're starting to see growth in the need for recycling MDF as well. I think Gary mentioned there's a good advisory board, having a team in place as well. That's been really important for us. And me coming to MDF recovery, I've got a background in MDF manufacturing before I was in academia, but I spent the last 14 years in academia helping companies develop technologies. So I've come with some depth background from the development side. And we also have other board members that come from industry that held very senior roles in industry. So it's been excellent to have access to those guys as well. So in terms of next steps, as mentioned, first 2 licenses are being sold, and the equipment is now being designed and built by our OEM, which is based in Italy, called PAL. They're experts in this sector. And our next steps, we're looking at where we're going to roll out the next licenses for MDF. So it's going back into MDF, but also the next licenses to look at how we can exploit it in insulation materials. Next slide, please. There's a very quick flow diagram of the process. It's very simple. We take MDF, usually got a bag of tricks and we take waste MDF, which look like shredded up bits of IKEA. So we're going to buy IKEA furniture. The IKEA furniture, particularly the lightweight stuff, is made out of lots of MDF. It's also got particle board there. It's got wood. It's all laminated, so it's converting materials like that back into nice fluffy fibres. Those fibres can be made into insulation materials, which go into timber frame construction. So again, working with people like Adra off the road, looking at how we can improve insulation in houses in UK and Wales in the future is really important for us. So it's a very simple process. The patented bit is the owner keating bit, and that's where we do a family of patents around that, and have open protection and use of owner keating. Next slide, please. Okay, that just shows how rapidly this process works. It's basically what process called hydrolysis. We're using water and temperature. The owner heating to very rapidly swell the MDF, so it goes from solid rock to something that you can support out of art. Next slide, please. This is our project partner PAL. This is the design. So we're able, a load of engineers working on this now, doing the first design. So we called it disaggregator. That's going to be launched in development in production next year, Q3 new term. So we're working on that. Next slide. Those are the markets. So to talk about the markets, there are huge markets, both for MDF production and insulation. Where in the insulation side, we're estimating we're about 4% of that total available market, which is still significant. It's not as big as the whole market, but again, being realistic with those numbers, it's really critical. And again, the MDF side, it's a big market globally as well. So, being able to, it's got that stability and it's got a number of customers that we can do with. Next slide, please. Why bother? It's 50% cheaper if you use recycled fibre. It's huge opportunity commercially. So, working with the MDF manufacturers, they can reduce their costs significantly, and that's the commercial opportunity for us compared to using virgin fibre, both in MDF and in insulation materials. The next slide is this. So this is what we're working on at the moment. Those are the 2 licensing deals we're looking at. We've actually included another one, which is particle board. So that's another product that we've been working on recently. The territories we're currently focused on: North America, South America, and Asia. We've had some great help from export whales, so they've been really useful, giving us leads to state by state into the investment teams. And we have a nicer conversation with the investment teams because they want to do something for you, they want to help. And they sometimes have their own in-house research people that then go out and say, well, we're looking at how much waste is in a particular state. Then, how much waste is it? And they're helping to do assessment planning. And that's very good. Lots of great support from machines and that. There's identifying those partnership opportunities. We have a sales forecast matching that with our income from what we plan. We have funding currently. We have a private investor, but we also have some investment funding from One Planet. So it's mapping all that out. That's that burn that we have. We have got income coming in now, so that's great. But we need more income, and I think it's all. You always have to be looking at what deals are available. There's some exciting offers at the moment. So yeah, it's ongoing approach looking at that, seeing if you've got the funding and sort of demonstrating that you're on track to achieving those, ambitious targets, and making sure you're doing it in a sensible approach, credibility. That's very quickly, quick snapshots of what we've been doing, and say lots of the advantage for us going down the licensing and having patents has allowed us to engage with very senior big companies quite early on. That's been successful inspiration.
Well, many congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Long basis of them still learning.
Any questions from the room, from the audience here? Boardroom? Yes, I think that's his a very, very interesting example and how you use your connections to speaking when dealing. The two talks I contributed to, one in Aberystwyth and one here.
So I've always felt strongly about patents and IP and exploitation of that. And I'm sort of switched roles. I've been helping the companies move forward with patents on IP and exploiting that, and helping them demonstrate their technologies now. And with the hats on, it's very much focused working on selling and licensing those technologies. So it's great to see it from a different perspective as well.
Many thanks. Any questions from the internet? Right. Can I just simply make another introduction out of the sequels? Tom Burke has been one of the legends of this organisation, and I've known him ever since this has opened. And he started off, I think, helping to develop animated technologies, which is another success story of this M-SParc. But then the thing which really impressed me during lockdown was we were all dealing with things like Zoom, which was always down, or Teams, which never seemed to work for me. We had something in plain simple. Well, it was English and Welsh, and I suppose also everything else was higher, which was a greeting. And it was always really good, really nice to use. But that has now evolved into something else. And I think you are now one of certainly the centres and possibly one of the nation's exponents of esports. And I was reading not very long ago about the intellectual property issues, because it's obviously something which has money and business. And I believe you're going to be talking about some of that. And the final thing I would like to say is that Tom and I were recently involved in a scale-up, accelerator scale-ups that we have we've always had it. We've had for the last few years accelerators, startups. But we have in this M-SParc an accelerator for scale-ups, and Tom is running that. And a few weeks ago, he very kindly invited me to give a short talk on intellectual property and various issues which arise at some of his startups. And that was broadcast not just simply here in North Wales, but also down in Tramshed in Swansea, Newport and Cardiff. So, Tom, perhaps you can tell us what your latest thing is, your latest manifestation.
Yeah, Pnawn pawb. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Jane. Hopefully I could do it some justice. Just to say it's been fantastic to be invited to World Enterprise Day and do another talk for you, and the work you do with IP and helping companies out is really important, I think. And great to hear from number of other talkers today as well. I've certainly been making a lot of notes as we've been going along. So, yes, I've been involved in a number of different areas where IP's been important, as Jane covered there. And Hire was a corporate events platform which kind of managed the hybrid or online element of events. And that was really important during the pandemic. But as we came out of that, as we're all aware, became less important, and a number of our customers kind of segued down into some of the bigger companies we were up against, and we just couldn't really compete against that. So we started to explore other areas to take the business, and esports seemed like a very good one, and just happened through a conversation within the team, basically. So before I begin, can I get a quick show of hands to know what to see if people know what esports is? There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Therefore,
I've learned, so.
It gets better every time I ask that question. When we first started exploring it, not many people knew at all, but it's apparent now with the amount of people that are actually starting to use it. Sharing the wrong screen there. Apologies. They're actually starting to use it, to hear about it, that it is starting to seep through into, you know, business and the public sphere. So, recognizing that esports was a potential market for us, and that the platform we had created fitted really well with esports viewing online. That is where you can have kind of multiple points of view from a single event area. We decided to turn higher, or pivot as they like to call it in the startup or business world, into esports. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of the reasons for that, esports is a huge global market and is expected to exceed 1.9 billion by 2025, which, you know, we in Wales can definitely be part of. It offers significant cultural, economic and educational opportunities. All the colleges and universities want to be involved in it. There's a huge industry that surrounds this kind of competitive game in itself. You know, you've got the business side of things, marketing, you've got even things down to kind of psychological care for esports teams and things like that. So it's not just people playing games, it's a massive market that surrounds the whole of it. It's great for kind of digital skills and will be an area for job growth in the future. And we here in Wales could definitely strengthen cultural identity through it, build strategic partnerships and boost local economies. Now, the Eisteddfod is all about that kind of last part there that I was talking about, which is increasing the cultural identity of Wales through esports. So Streams Plus is the platform we launched for this esports to take advantage of it, and we launched it in July. And one of the springboards that we used to do that was an R4 project, which we did in combination with M-SParc. For those of you who don't know about R4, R4 is a fund which is used to increase the use of Welsh in communities within the R4 region. So that's Ceredigion, Ynys Môn, it's Gwynedd, and it's Sir Gâi of Carmarthenshire. So we came up with a plan to run a esports tournament with M-SParc and a number of the partners, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. So the idea was to engage with young people from across the R4 region. Just got to make sure that we're on the right screen here. Apologies for that. Classic tech issues. So the idea, was to engage with young people from across the R4 regions. That's in Ynys Môn and Gwynedd, Carmarthenshire and Ceredigion, and have a grand final at the Eisteddfod, the National Eisteddfod, which is in Pontypridd. So there's a number of areas where IP was used within this. Number one, we were developing this new platform, Streams Plus. Number two is we created this brand called Eisteddfod, which is like a play on words. Eisteddfod obviously has an I before the S. Eisteddfod is like your esports stroke Steddfod. So hopefully that's reasonably obvious. And we needed to engage with young people from within those regions. And by the end of the project, we had a fantastic amount of input from not only participants, but also audiences. We managed to reach between 1,000 and 2,000 people by the end of it. And part of what we did there was bringing partners into this. So it's really important for the success of the tournament that we had a number of partners. First of all, it was Hire and M-SParc who led on the R4 bid, But to strengthen that bid, we spoke to people like the Football Association of Wales, who are really keen to explore this new demographic, the esports world. M-SParc, S4C, who were keen to get involved. Esports Wales, who we had reached out to previously, they helped us out in a number of ways. The actual ystafell itself, and then all these other partners who you can see here who helped throughout the project. It was really important in terms of IP to make sure that we were protecting their brands as we went along, and that was especially so for S4C, where we had to actually sign agreements to make sure that we were doing that. So we ran the competition both online and in person, as you can expect, with a hybrid platform that we designed. That was quite important to us. It was across 5 venues in that R4 region, which on reflection was a little bit crazy, especially in the time frame that we'd given ourselves. So we decided to run 4 venues in 4 days, spreading from Carmarthen all the way up to Ynys, and basically nearly killed the production crew in that, because not only were we developing this platform where people could watch online, we were running the event itself, which meant building stages, which meant getting subcontractors in place to help out, and it meant kind of bringing people to various venues in those 4 regions. So quite a lot was going on there, and that brand was really important. So the ystafell brand that we created helped pull it all together and give us some strength to add to the competition and a little bit of kind of authority, basically.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. This was so we're going to see great things in esports. We're going to be Wales's answer to South Korea.
Yes, hopefully. It's been happening for a long time in Southeast Asia, so we are kind of catching up with what's been going on in the rest of the world. But it's kind of firmly landed now in Europe and Wales. Next year, in fact, is the first esports Olympics, which is being run by the International Olympics Committee, so it's all officiated. It won't be part of the Olympics itself. It's got its own Olympics, like the Winter Olympics. So you'll see a lot about that next year. But yeah, basically a huge area for growth and fantastic opportunity for us to launch a platform into develop this brand ystafell, which we can actually take to other areas and sell almost as a package event. You know, this is what we did during the ystafell. This is what we can bring to your city or area or region, whatever. So yeah, I guess like 3 areas of IP there within that project.
Oh yes, there are lots. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm sure there are going to be questions at the very, very end. But that's fascinating. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And now I'd like to introduce, I think Emma is here very patiently waiting, and you have a lot. Yes, please do. Emma is the regional official in charge from the Intellectual Property Office for regional development, including the nations of the United Kingdom, including Wales in particular. And she's a lady who gets things done, because last year I was quizzing her about Welsh language policy of the Intellectual Property Office. And do you know, back in July, we actually had a new policy, which I'm sure is all written by Emma, which is all due to her. And it's updated recently, but we've actually got the start of the trademark page translated. I'm sure that eventually it's going to be all translated. And then somebody from M-SParc is going to apply for a patent entirely in Welsh.
Brilliant. Thanks, great. Yeah, thank you for inviting me today. I'm sorry that I arrived a little late. There is no direct route from South Wales to North Wales. There's no easy way of getting here. So yes, I'm the regional policy advisor for devolved nations. So I cover Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Okay. There you go. So the reason I'm here today is to talk to you about what the Intellectual Property Office can offer you, the services that we have available, and the type of things that we're doing at the moment to encourage innovation and encourage protection of IP and to make it easier for you in terms of obtaining intellectual property rights, enforcing intellectual property rights, and then utilising them as an asset, and as has already been talked about already today. So we want to make that process a lot easier for you. We trying as an IP office to create a bit of a world-leading environment. We do have good feedback on our office as a whole in terms of international offices, and we're trying to be the best IP office that there is. I think we're doing okay at the moment. That seems to be what the feedback is. But we're just trying to make the IPO really a place of work and encourage our staff to encourage SMEs to apply for those IP rights, which are so crucial to businesses. And the reason IP is important is because there's so much investment in the IP in terms of business. And it's realising how important that is for your business, and we've already touched on that today, so I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted a little bit. But IP protects around 63 billion of the 130 billion assets across the UK. So it's a really important part of business and a key thing for people to be aware of. So we're driving innovation by giving people the confidence to invest in doing something new and better for society. So maybe this example, a better place for us to live by creating those tools and enabling you to protect your innovations and use them to grow your business. So I work within the business support and regional growth team, and we're part of an ecosystem developing policy interventions to ensure that the SMEs and innovators are understanding the value of their IPS assets within their business, and then positively impacting on the government's ambitions to level up all of the UK. We help to make businesses access IP at the right time. So my role as the regional policy officer for the devolved nations is to develop those interventions across our partners and stakeholders, which is why I'm working with M-SParc today. And I'm trying to build those relationships across our stakeholders across those regions to reach as many SMEs and micro businesses as we possibly can, so they understand how important IP is and how to utilise IP within the business. So I'm not alone in terms of regional policy advisors. I cover devolved nations, but we also have a policy advisor covering Greater Manchester, West Midlands, West of England. This is part of our overall IPO strategy to reach as many economic agencies as we possibly can and spread the word about how important IP is, and to inform businesses really at the right time, and not to scare businesses. IP is a complex subject, but it doesn't have to be. And there's lots and lots of help and support out there, particularly from the Intellectual Property Office. We just want you to understand how easy it is to gain those IP rights and not to be afraid of trying to apply for the IP rights. And by building relationships with our partners, and we're hoping to create an IP legacy across those regions. So I'll intervene where is necessary, and then hopefully we'll create a legacy across the UK. As part of this legacy, in July, we launched a new funding scheme. For those of you who are not aware, it's the IPO's Audit and Access Funding Schemes. We allocate a certain amount of money to each of our partner regions. So we work with Scottish Enterprise, Welsh Government, Innovate UK, Invest Northern Ireland, to allow their businesses to access this funding. And the funding will give you up to £3,000 of IP professional advice. with the business contributing £750 towards that, and the IPO contributing £2,250. Like I said, there is a small allocation. So in Wales, in particular, if you are interested in utilising that funding, the innovation team of large government are triaging the applications. Hopefully then, by the wraparound business support you receive from the IP professional, you receive an audit from the IP professional, advising you on whether there is IP in your business and whether you should be taking that IP forward. The advice may be to use the IP access funding scheme, and that will allow you some more professional support from an IP professional, which can draft things like confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure agreements, and support with licensing. Again, that's the £3,000 funding offer. We started that in July 2024. That is due to end March next year. As well as the funding schemes, we offer patent libraries and business and IT centres across the UK. It's more localised support tailored to walk-in businesses that maybe want some help with patent searching, maybe some help on, yes.
Are the business and IP centres supported by Arts Council England? I think that there's one in Glasgow, but there's none outside England except the one in Glasgow. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, that's why I was quizzing you last year on Wales Welsh language policy, is to get materials here for our businesses, the equivalent of the business and IP centre infrastructure here for in M-SParc. I did a lot of work with Emily Roberts about this, and we've been pressing you guys in the intellectual property office.
And I did take it back, as I promised, and the initial response was, yes, we are open to opening a patent library, as the offer was, but part of the condition for that would be that the staff who would be running that potential centre would be trained by the masterclass. Please say that we already have one person on here trained on our masterclass. We don't have any funding currently to open an IP centre in Wales. So that is a conversation that we can continue, because as long as there is a facility available and the staff are trained and able to give the support to walk-in businesses through our IP masterclass, then that is something that we can look into. So it's not off the table.
Good, because there's so much which can be built, and then you have an inventors club.
I think it could be a fantastic resource. Yeah.
And all sorts of talks and bits on LinkedIn, and so we've already got a group which I set up on LinkedIn, but they could be expanded so much.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to have a centre in North Wales. The IPO acts as kind of a centre for the south, so representing Wales, but the idea of levelling up and making IP accessible to all areas of the UK would lend itself well to
I've got a new medical school at the University of Bangor, and that can be no doubt developing all sorts of spin-offs.
You really don't need to convince me. I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't make the decisions, unfortunately, but it's something that it's a conversation that we will continue. There will be a certain criteria needed, and I think that we will probably fit most of that criteria. So it's not something that we'll end to.
Yeah, and we have already got patent clinics, although we've not actually had anybody using it yet, but we've got patent attorney here.
Most of the infrastructure is already in place. It's just a case of the IPOs back in and then something done. So yeah, I'm very keen for that to happen, and it's something that I want to push on.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. It's not been forgotten. We run a business education program as well, as part of our outreach program. We directly engage with over 50,000 businesses per year through our outreach programs. So that would be attending events, running webinars, running courses. As we've already talked about, our IP Masterclass training program has been developed to help primarily business advisors, include IP guidance and support into the support services, but we also run a commercial masterclass at a charge for businesses to attend as well. So it'd be a similar course to the IP Masterclass for advisors, but on a commercial basis. Got a number of the objectives of the masterclass as well. So if you are interested in attending a commercial masterclass as a business, like I said, there is a cost for it. It's a minimal cost. I think it's £300 for a 2-day course, and we're running them around the country. And the objective is to learn and recognise and understand IP assets and the potential impacts they can have on yourself as a business. Understand directly from our examiners and policy advisors the formal ways in which to protect IP. There's a number of speakers in attendance over the 2 days of the masterclass. Patent examiners, trademark examiners, policy advisors who speak at the 2-day course, and so you'll have that direct contact with the person on the ground examining applications. So it's a really worthwhile course. And then there's guest speakers coming in from licensing companies, and we've got it's one of the speakers that we use there. And there's a discovery of the wide range of tools that we've got available on our website that we're expanding continuously. So from this, we've got an education framework, but this does start at age 4. We've got an education program supported by our organisations in conjunction with Wallace and Wellness, and we've developed a whole package of learning materials for teachers and the branding and ideas. And it's essentially a piece of work that the children can do. It's a competition they can get involved in where they create their own inventions, so they talk about branding around it, and so there's the registered design implication and copyright implication. So the idea is they've created an invention in the same way that Wallace and Gromit do, and then there's that opportunity to talk about protection of a brand. And we get a huge amount of entries in every year, and then we get into our office. And there was one occasion where a child had developed this car that shot across and let it going across the car park of the building down to report. So it's really good fun, and it's a good way for children to learn about intellectual property from young, which we're teaching for the teachers as well. And then onto the business side of things, well, so then into IP for education for university students and further education students, and Tutor Plus for the tutors who may be including IP as part of their modules. And then on to IP Health Check, which is also being looked at the moment, and then refreshing. And then there's a kit for business advisors, so it's a business-to-business toolkit, and then some more information and guidance on IP for investment and IP there for government employees as well. So there's lots of information on our website. I'm not sure if we've got time to show these videos. We've got a YouTube channel, and we've also recently developed a handy video about our Tamasha network, which some of you may not be aware of. So rather than tell you what they are, I think I will try and show this video. Is that everything? Just before that, Brent, I just want to say this is from our YouTube channel. This is not the Itashi video. Itashi is the other one. There's a whole suite of these videos on our YouTube channel, and it's a really, I think I like them because it explains IP in the plain English and positive way of understanding. So for those businesses who are not sure what to do, this is a really great place for them to start. Like a little flavour of what's available on our website for you.
I find them very useful. I refer people to them.
Yeah, they are really useful.
And there's some good ones from the WIPO as well. And
this is our my presentations wanted to show you the videos of the type of free resources that are available on our website. But the key takeaway is we're here to help. So please get in contact with us for anything. There's lots of information available online, and there's lots of help and support. We bring our telephone number. You can contact us through our social media channels, or you can contact the information as well. And there's me as well. You can contact me to take questions or them.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Problem.
Right, well, we've been getting messages from the orangutans as well. So, but as we've got some of our experts here, and we've also got a representative from the banking industry here who might want to say something. This is about Barclays Bank and what you are inventors, Alison. Michelle, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just with the general side of banking, so we've got different arms that deal with we've got our computer labs that deal with innovation as well. So we've got dedicated managers and those teams that can help. So it's really just used as a point of contact. As long as you've got a name within Barclays, we can think you right there. And actually, it's just starting to build up a relationship with the legal labs now. We've got a meeting with a new party.
Very encouraging indeed. Anybody around the table wants to make a contribution about their business, an idea, we can still talk about these things unofficially, because there's still, I'm sure, plenty of tea and coffee in here. But while we're on camera, no, everybody happy? Everybody online happy? Is Gareth the orangutan happy? Yeah, okay, right. Well, thank you very much indeed to all the contributors. This was an excellent contribution. It was our longest, but I think we learned the most. And we've learned a lot about the enterprises which are developed here, typified by Rob and Tom. We've heard a lot about the support which is available from the Intellectual Property Office. We've heard about the Investment Fund for Wales, which is very, very promising means of access to funding. And we've heard also about the lending facilities which are available through the banks, and of course support things like the Eagle Labs and so on. And you've been an excellent audience, and thank you very, very much for coming. And I look forward, I hope, to seeing you all again, perhaps at World Intellectual Property Day on the 26th April.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming here, for joining us online. Jane, thank you for everything. Crystal, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am y gefnogaeth i gyd. Thank you for all the support that you've given us and for bringing us these amazing speakers as well. And it's really fantastic, really, the contacts that we make with us and the introductions. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you all for travelling so far. So we've come quite a distance today. I think you've beaten everybody from Newport. Fine, Glen, Jane, you come from Liverpool as well, and Eric from Cardiff as well. So we appreciate everybody's time for the opinions as well. It's been a really good session. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. What do you want?
Thank you, Fiona. That's